Okay. You also testified that if you were required to surge tomorrow, you could get 68% of the surface ships to sea. If you had to do that, would those ships have the magazine depth required to meet the O plan requirements?
That would be a challenge in our preferred munitions. So we have to replenish those stocks, and that's the first part of the answer. So SM-6, SM-2, Tomahawk, Maritime Strike Tomahawk in the future for aircraft, LRASM, those are all the munitions we need to pursue for a threat against China.
Okay, thank you. Yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. Vasquez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for your service and for your time this afternoon. I have the privilege of representing New Mexico's 2nd District, home to White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base. Both bases face a unique set of challenges, particularly around the availability of quality housing for service members and their families. Holloman Air Force Base is currently at 99% capacity, probably about 100% by now, for on-base housing, forcing service members and their families to live off base in a rural community where options are limited and more expensive, if they even exist at all. And so even on base, the housing isn't much better. It's outdated, it's deteriorating, and it fails to meet the standards of what we owe our airmen and women and our service members. Lieutenant General Spain, the department's status quo for housing has been insufficient. Beyond simply updating aging units, what steps is the Air Force taking in fiscal year 26 to meet the housing demands at rural installations like Holloman?
Thanks, Representative Vasquez. Appreciate your time and the question and the opportunity to talk about Holloman. Number one, for Holloman specifically, we just initiated a housing requirements analysis effort that's ongoing that should complete this summer, and that'll give us specific recommendations to work with the community to adjust our capacity at that location. And that's typically how we do that, and how we intend to move out in other rural locations is a housing analysis, assess the capacity, and then what way we can work with the community directly to improve that circumstance.
Thank you, Lieutenant General. I appreciate that, and I know our airmen and women and some of their families, as well as the unaccompanied service members, really appreciate that, especially being home to the MQ-9 Reaper program and the pilot trainers who are so critical to our defense here. At White Sands Missile Range, much of the housing on base also dates back to post-World War II era, and it's seen minimal upgrades in the decades since. General Mingus, last summer, White Sands Missile Range and Fort Bliss were supposed to receive roughly $7 million from the Army's Installation Management Command to improve legacy housing. That funding never materialized. Could you explain why those funds were not distributed, when White Sands can expect to receive those funds, and what the Army is doing in fiscal year 26 to improve housing quality in rural bases?
Yes, sir. Start off to echo your point. Wismar is incredibly important to us. That's where our Army Test and Evaluation Command does the vast majority of our high-end missile tests, and anything that requires range and quality of life there. We've also designated that recently as a remote and isolated place, which helps with a lot of the things you're talking about. That $7 million is still earmarked against that improvements. That proposal is about ready to go out, so I think you'll see some movement on that here shortly, sir.
Thank you so much. I thank you and the community of Las Cruces and Alamogordo and the folks at White Sands Missile Range. Thank you for that. Last week, I voted in this committee to provide this department with an additional $9 billion for quality of life improvements, including housing, because I firmly believe we owe it to our service members. But I also don't want to see that money wasted. General Mingus and Lieutenant General Spain, how will you ensure that this additional funding is a good use of taxpayer dollars to provide adequate housing and additional quality of life services for members in rural districts like mine?
Specific to the reconciliation bill, sir?
That's correct.
Yeah. We expect, and I think it'll be about equal across the services, so I think we'll see about $2 billion. If you remember from our testimony last year, both the Secretary and the Chief, we were able to take our 255 barracks that needed renovation. We were able to deal with almost all of those minus 55, which this $2 billion is already earmarked against those 55 that still need to be moved from Q3 to Q4 up to Q1, Q2.
Thanks again. So for the Air Force, I think we're going to be able to, well, once we see what the details are of the language and of the legislation, we'll know exactly what is coming to the Air Force and what we'll be able to accomplish. We certainly have a significant deferred maintenance package in this space across the Air Force, and a long list of things that we'll need to complete based on the additional funding if it comes to fruition. But certainly housing, family housing and unaccompanied housing are top on the list for the Air Force. We have a long list of projects that we can complete if we are granted the authority.
Thank you, Lieutenant General, and thank you, General, for your answers. Housing is one of the biggest challenges that we face, especially in places like Alamogordo, New Mexico, Las Cruces, New Mexico. And if folks don't have a safe, affordable place to live, it impacts not only their well-being, but their ability to do their jobs, and that affects our readiness as a nation. Readiness equals national security, and so investing in housing, infrastructure, and quality of life pays dividends down the line. Thank you all for your time and for your service to our country. I yield back the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank each of our witnesses for their service and their leadership. We are all very grateful for your commitment to this country and for the dedication that you provided over many, many years of service. Thanks, each of you. General Mingus, I represent some significant Army assets in Kansas, and I have a handful of questions I'd like to ask of you related to that. Like all of my colleagues, I read with interest the reports of the Army Transformation Initiative, and we're all beginning to sort through what that may mean long-term in terms of our strategic thinking and the role of our various ground forces. Can you talk a bit about, as we look forward in light of the initiative, how we should be thinking about the role of heavy ground forces, particularly heavy infantry divisions, in America's defense going forward? Where do they fit in what appears to be an increasingly mobile and agile thinking?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we still, as an Army, believe that there is a role, and the reason and what sets us apart from any other Army in the world is the combination of our light, striker, and heavy formations. Even though the acute threat and what we are all focused on is in Indo-PACOM and China, we're an Army that has to be prepared to go anywhere around the world. A lot of people like to look at some of the lessons learned coming out of Ukraine and say that the tank isn't going to survive. Heavy formations are not going to survive on the modern battlefield. No singular platform is designed to survive by itself. It's the combination of infantry, artillery, armor, engineers, and the sustainment that goes with that in a joint environment in a combined arms fashion that allows us to win in the future battlefields that are out there. So we think our heavy formations absolutely have a role to play in the future.
Thank you, sir. And in light of that, how should we be thinking, for example, obviously I have the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley. How should we be thinking in terms of our ability to rapidly deploy anywhere in the world, both our equipment and our personnel when the 911 call comes in, so to speak? How should we be shaping our thinking on that going forward?
Any activation of an O plan that requires the mobilization of and the movement of large formations is a huge undertaking. Our Forces Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, does a tabletop every year to make sure that those mass mobilization capabilities across our active Guard and Reserve are there. The other, you can call it a benefit, or the thing that we have reaped the results of, having had 2 heavy brigade combat teams rotating back and forth to Europe for the last 3 years, has exercised those muscles on a pretty grand scale that we have not seen in a while.
Thank you. And on a related note, again, thinking about the 1st Infantry, although this question is applicable obviously much more broadly to our ground forces in the continental United States, as we take in lessons learned, not only from what we've observed in Ukraine, but particularly there, as well as others, the increasing role of small, relatively inexpensive unmanned aerial systems and the need to integrate those with our ground operations going forward, both in our planning and in our training. How should we be thinking about that sort of interactive training of small UASs and our existing heavy ground forces in the continental United States?
So the Germans took the tank, the plane, and the radio and put it together in a meaningful way between 1938 and 39 and changed how the world fights in the land force. If you take robotics, autonomy, AI, fully autonomous, fully robotic, I mean, all the things that are being put into our formations today, we are rapidly trying to take a look at what happened in Ukraine, what happened in Gaza, what happened other places around the world, to make sure that as this technology comes in, it's not just the tech itself, but how do you put it together so that we can still dominate in the future?
And sir, last question. Am I correct then in concluding that as we do that, as we go through this process, this learning, this preparing, this integrating, that it's going to require us to have an emphasis on both the thinking process and the executing process? That is to say that there's a role for what is now TRADOC and thinking through how we do this, but there's also a role for big spaces where we can move heavy equipment in cooperation with airspaces where we can operate small vehicles.
Absolutely, sir. And so the chief started our initiative that I mentioned in my opening comments called the Transformation in Contact, where we infused this high tech across multiple platforms that are out there in volumes and in numbers that we probably would exceed in a normal environment, because we wanted to learn from those formations. At what point do you have too many unmanned systems before you can't employ them, or you are overwhelmed by the sensors that are out there? And we have been doing this now through train-ups and our combat training centers, so it's bottom-up. We're learning from them exactly how many UAVs do you put in a brigade formation, how many robots do you put in a formation, how many people do you need to analyze the information that's coming from those sensors that are out there. And it's easy in the Pentagon to look under white lights and we think it's 200, but it's much more impactful when you're hearing that from the troops on the ground.
Thank you, General. Thanks to each of the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Tran. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and to all our witnesses. Thank you so much for being here and for your service to this great country. General Mingus, my first question pertains to the pending decision to offload Army prepositioned stocks afloat in favor of a land-based location in the Indo-Pacific Theater. This decision marks a significant shift in our logistical posture and raises questions about the reliability of host nation support in a future contingency, especially given recent geopolitical developments. As you may be aware, Vietnam celebrated the fall of Saigon last week during a parade which featured Chinese PLA soldiers marching alongside their Vietnamese counterparts for the first time ever, a stark and symbolic signal for growing ideological and strategic alignment between the Socialist Republic of Vietnam and the People's Republic of China. In evaluating potential land-based alternatives to APS-3, how is the Army accounting for the political risks of stationing stocks in countries like Vietnam, particularly given its one-party communist system, geographic proximity to China, and the uncertainty of access rights in a conflict scenario?
Sir, we have not considered Vietnam. Right now, Australia and Philippines are the two principal locations. But when we began this journey, it started with those 7, 8 ships that we had for APS-3 were costing us in excess of $300 million a year. They were not loaded, combat configured, and so the offload time would have been when wherever they showed up, they would not have been ready to fight. It has also been my experience that unless an afloat APS is in the exact right spot when a crisis occurs, which we have a hard time predicting, you're generally not going to be in the right spot. And so we felt it much more effective, the acute threat, the #1 priority for our nation, that being China, that we download that, reset it, and put it aground in a place where it can be used effectively in a future fight.
Thank you. Appreciate that answer, General. My district is home to the Joint Forces Training Base Los Alamitos, which is strategically located in Southern California and well situated for joint training exercise by having significant aviation, logistics, and training infrastructure. Given current readiness challenges, including pilot shortages, logistics constraints, and budgetary pressures to maximize resources, I am concerned that the Joint Forces Training Base Los Al remains underutilized by active components in a tightening environment. Question for all the services. Understanding that JFTB Los Al falls under the California National Guard, are there any policy or procedural reasons that prevent your active components from incorporating this base into your logistics of training strategies under the current readiness strains? And if not, what are the specific reasons joint training bases like JFTB Los Al have not been more fully incorporated into planning frameworks?
So no policy issues that I'm aware of, but I will go back and find out just to make sure. And we do, from a whole Army concept, Guard, active, reserve, the vast majority of our logistics are in our reserve component. And so it's natural, and we do maximize the use of our reserve centers and our reserve mobilization centers, but I'll get a better answer for you after this.
Thank you, General. And the offer to train there goes to the other branches as well. I appreciate you all so much, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And Mr. Carbajal, welcome back to HASC. Your presence and unique perspective has been sorely missed. So you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bergman and Ranking Member Garamendi, for the opportunity to join your subcommittee today. You know, Mr. Wilson was bragging about multi-service family that he was, and I'm proud that I'm a single-service family, all Marines, and equally proud. And also, as an enlisted Marine, I must say, I used to hate hurry up and wait in the Marine Corps. So I'm extremely pleased to see a bunch of officers here doing a little bit of hurry up and wait as well. So just thought I'd share that with you. General Guetlein, I'm not normally on this readiness subcommittee, but I felt compelled to attend today and ask you about the ramifications of civilian workforce cuts on Space Force. As you are aware, I represent Vandenberg Space Force Base, an important location that supports key missions of the Space Force. I'm quite concerned about the impact of the executive orders, recent executive orders, to reduce the civilian workforce on Space Force readiness. Space Force is the connective fabric behind the joint force, and without dominance in space, there is no conflict we can win. Space Force's force structure is very different from other services in that you rely heavily on civilian personnel to carry out the mission. Often these are top performing and highly specialized individuals who could easily get hired in the private sector. I was alarmed to hear about the disproportionate impact the reductions will have on Space Force, with projections that you will lose over 13% of your civilian workforce. General Guetlein, can you briefly share with us how many civilians you employ and how many you have lost to each round of the deferred resignation program? And did you indeed lose 13% of your workforce?
Congressman, thank you for that question. As you know, the Space Force is the smallest force with the smallest budget with the largest AOR. So any personnel reductions in the United States Space Force hurt, especially these. We currently have 5,674 civilians. They make up about 1/3 of our entire total force. Of the deferred reduction programs, 223 took it in round one. Another 448 have taken it in round two, for a total of 671. When you combine those DRPs with the hiring freeze, the United States Space Force is down 13.7% in our civilian population.
Say that percentage again.
13.7.
Thank you. Why have so many civilians elected to leave the Space Force?
Congressman, some of them were to early retirement, as well as you called it out that the Space Force by its nature is a high-tech force, and these civilians can get jobs elsewhere. You couple that with the return to work and the quality of life. We tend to be in high density areas like Los Angeles, and the quality of life means that these individuals are driving long distances, and they have chosen to take alternative career paths going forward.
What are some concrete examples of risks you are taking by losing hundreds of employees in a matter of months, especially considering there is a hiring freeze and you cannot backfill these positions?
Congressman, I think we have done pretty good at covering down on the risk, moving the forces around, working to become more efficient and more effective. We are seeing challenges in hiring in areas like child care and base operating support. And as you know, the Space Force employees in place, so we are heavily dependent on those core functions on our bases, and that is really where we are taking the risk, is in the infrastructure and the daily operations of our bases.
Thank you. And with my remaining time, I just wanted to congratulate you, General Mahoney, on being the only service, let me repeat that, the only service that has obtained a clean audit. which I hope the rest of the services can actually accomplish in the near future. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carbajal. That, with the exception of my questions, will complete the first round. So I think Congressman Garamendi and I have agreed that we are both going to ask more questions in a second round. Congressman Schmidt, you good? Okay, General Guetlein. I'm familiar with the Space Force's new Resilient GPS program, and I know Space Force understands its importance given how reliant our military is on space-based capabilities and the growing vulnerability of these systems to threats. The program is also a marquee example of how Space Force can work with new commercial space companies to deploy new capabilities faster and at lower cost. Can you tell me, how Space Force is working in this private sector, if you will, meld with military R&D? How is Space Force working with this new commercial space with these companies to rapidly counter the evolving threats posed by our adversaries?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. We are seeing more threat activity in space than we have seen before. It is becoming extremely contested. What is more troublesome is the behaviors that we are seeing from our adversaries are becoming the norms. We're seeing GPS spoofing, GPS jamming. We're seeing lasing of our ISR satellites. We're seeing shadowing of our national assets in space in a cat and mouse game. So it's become a very dangerous area. You couple that with the fact that we are the smallest service with the largest AOR, which means I cannot cover down with military capabilities across my entire domain. I have to partner with international, I have to partner with commercial and what we call hybrid architectures, which is the full integration and networking of commercial, allied, and DOD capabilities simultaneously. By building hybrid architectures, we're building out resilience through excess capacity, redundancy, and proliferation. We are drastically expanding our attack surface because they can no longer take out one of us, they have to take out all of us. So in that pursuit for resiliency and hybrid architectures, we are partnering with industry in ways we've never partnered before across any other domain. We are becoming fully interdependent upon each other in a very risk-based decision-making fashion. How much capability and capacity can I accept from commercial, and how much do I need to keep in reserve in our DOD? We're having those conscious conversations on a day-to-day basis. The really bright part of this future, though, is there's more innovation coming out of commercial than there ever has been in the past. So we are able to leapfrog our capabilities rapidly through these partnerships.
So what I heard you say was that compared to the other services, and you're the newest warfighter, if you will, as a service component. As you're establishing your capabilities to counter a truly rapidly changing, evolving threat, you have greater need for that involvement with the civilian sector now, as opposed to, let's say, if we're building a new airplane or a tank or whatever it happens to be, we have prototypes to work from, and we're going to change some things based on technology, based on the mission. But I hear you say you need to accomplish your mission. And if I'm misstating this, correct me, please. But you need that involvement of those outside the DOD resources, all the R&D that's happening within the civilian community, if you will, the space.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I know, Admiral Kilby, we talked a little bit about amphibs. And I think in your, last week, I think we talked thought I heard you say the Navy owes a 3-ship ARG, amphibious ready group. I'll stay out of my old acronyms. That's ready to embark Marines and conduct a training cycle and deploy on schedule. How are we going to get there? And how are we going to get there where actually we're meeting the mission of the 3.0, whatever you want to call it, but we need those deployed Navy amphibious vessels with our Marines and sailors on board to be all over the world tomorrow. I mean, we need them there today, but we definitely need them there tomorrow. Any thoughts on the plan here?
Yeah, a couple things, sir. I made that comment specifically because I just want to step into the breach here and say we cannot have what happened on Boxer and Wasp happen again, right? Those two big amphibs, for different reasons, were delayed, and in one case, we sent a disaggregated ARG forward. That does a disservice to the MU. It does a disservice to the Marine Corps and the combatant commander who wants to use that asset. So that's really the genesis of why I said that, because I want to be just public about that. What we're doing about it is specifically looking within the surface domain. Each one of those, as you and I talked about at breakfast, submarine, surface, air, 80% combat surge ready. Within the surface domain, I want to look at this subset of amphibious ships, because I want to make sure good performance at crew des level isn't washing out bad performance at the amphibious level. But we have to do a couple things. One, we have to be disciplined in our execution of planning and lock down that availability earlier. You weren't here, but I talked about doing open-ended specs earlier to inform the package to make sure I know what maintenance I need to do so I can buy that long lead material. I need to do some things differently. I need to do diesel maintenance in our CMAVs, which is outside of a major avail, so I can free up space, real estate on that ship to do maintenance around it. So I just need to be more creative and focus on the output here, which is making sure those ships are available to do that work. So we are at 61% combat surge ready across all ships today. That's not 80%, and I need to bring that water up to maintain both crew des and amphibs in a more effective manner. So I'm committed to do that.
Okay. I'm going to stop my first round right now and turn it over to Congressman Garamendi, and then I'll close it up when you're done, John.
Mr. Chairman, you were on a roll. I kind of hate to interrupt you. If you want to continue, I'm perfectly.
No, I needed a breath.
Well, I went and got coffee when you started, so I'm good to go. Gentlemen, thank you so very much. This is extremely important issues that we're dealing with here. I was listening to my colleagues, and they reminded me that all politics are local. I have no idea what's going on in the upper reaches of Michigan, but I do know that Travis Air Force Base, oh yes, there we are, General Spain, operates at about 60% of its potential capacity for lack of a taxiway. The county has made the property available to expand the taxiway. It could be done. It's not in the FIDEP. Why isn't it in the FIDEP? As near as I can tell, some of the munitions that were headed to Ukraine, as authorized by the White House and then stopped by the Secretary of Defense, were on planes that originated at Travis, stopped at Dover, where I think they're probably sitting now. But in any case, your attention to the taxiway issue. Want to get it in the FIDEP, want to get that done so that the full capacity with the two runways that are going to be completed in the next couple of years, so we can do that. General Kilby, you and I have talked about the oldest Navy base on the west coast of America, Mare Island, shut down in BRAC. It is now operating, handling a few naval vessels, non-combat vessels, all to the good. It can be upgraded. There are 4 dry docks there. They can handle the DDG. I'm not going to take one of your aircraft carriers, but it is there. You talked about the repair problems in the Pacific and using our allies. That's good to a point. At some point, they have to come home, or they should come home. And so I'd like to talk to you about Mare Island and the Navy's short-term and then long-term use of the 4 dry docks at Mare Island, which I believe are the only The 4+1, I think there's a floating dry dock in San Diego that's about to come online. So we'll talk about that. Now, having taken time to get to what's really important, my district, let's move on to some of these other things. General Mingus, you talked about combined forces, and I suppose that you were referring to your own forces and the various parts and pieces of that. I would expect that it also includes one or another of your colleagues at the table. Could you go into that a little bit more about the combined forces, and then if you'll pick up the Space Force issue as you talk about that?
Yes, sir. I mean, inside the Army, we have a term called combined arms maneuver, which takes all our warfighting functions and puts them together in a meaningful way, and you synchronize operations over time. It's fires and intel and protection and sustainment, and that's what we call. But when you go to joint combined arms maneuver, that's when we put the joint force together, and there's very little that any of us can do without the help of each other. I can't get anywhere without the Air Force or the Navy. As we think about the first and second island chain, there's going to, given the advent of some of our new long-range precision munitions we're going to be able to hold maritime targets at risk to help my shipmate here be able to get the fleet back in the first, second island chain. The Marines and us have to work together. They may have the initial punch, but there's this sustainment stuff that the Marines may look to us. And like I said, we can't get anywhere without the Air Force. And so the space is intertwined with all of that. We have a ton of ground control stations that we interoperate. Every one of our vehicles, every one of our humans, every one of our soldiers, they carry some kind of a location device that is reliant on space or communicate through space. And so position, navigation, and timing, communications, it goes on and on. There's nothing that the land force can't do without a space component that goes with it. So that's the power of the joint force.
Maybe one addition. To a greater extent than ever before that I remember, we are relying on each other to service each other's munitions. That's the Air Force and Space Force in particular, but Airborne Moving Target Indicator to take weapons that have flown out of the custody of my sensors is a place we're going to be more and more. So we've got to be able to work and train and execute together in a manner that is going to be completely reliant on the joint force.
I thought that you might go in that direction. And ultimately, none of it works if space doesn't work. So, and we need to have a long conversation about that, and I'm sure the other subcommittees are also, how that interaction. As you were talking about weapons, I was just looking at the early bird briefing, and the Ukrainians took a Sidewinder missile, put it on some floating drone, and shot down. I see some smiles. Now, how the hell they do that? That's the kind of innovation that I hope we're seeing in all of your work. I won't ask you. That's probably over a cup of coffee in the morning to talk about how they did that. I'm curious. Now, all of you are also developing your own space assets. How does that integrate with Space Force's assets? And the ultimate question, why are you doing that, and why are you not depending on Space Force?
Staying at the classification levels that we need.
Well, then let's not go there. Just let that question hang there, and I'll catch you down the road a piece. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And I think that applies to, it applies to all of you. And so the integration of these systems and Space Force. We'll let it stop right there. Where do I want to go next? Did you get your deep breath? You got your breath back? I'm ready. Take a run at it, and I'll come back at it.
Now, I say this seriously and with great respect for my colleague. You know, he is, John, you are a few months older than I am. And we're the two old dogs up here. So that's what you get when you have people who have been around a long time and served in many different capacities. So I appreciate you bearing with us, as sometimes we'll ask questions that may not seem on point, but we talk a lot outside of the hearing room and are mutually locked at the hip when it comes to, number one, be ready to fight, but also be ready to win. Readiness, I would suggest to you, also means that you all, each service, have some level of prioritized surge capability. In a non-classified scenario, and if we need to take this classified at a future date to really get into it, what are the current major inhibitors to each of your services' ability to surge? If you needed to fly things, float things, drive things, whatever it is tonight, are there anything that you would want us to know that are inhibitors, again, in an unclassified way? You could say very simply, people, I don't have enough sailors to man my ships. I don't have enough, maintainers to maintain the tanks, whatever it is. General Mingus, you want to enlighten us a little bit what you think?
We are moving in the right direction here, but the principal driver of readiness across the Army for the last year to two has been the people. Our structure, in other words, the number of flags that we have across the Army would call for an end strength of about 473,000. Our end strength today is 449,000. We will end the year, I think, at about 452,000, and we are on a path to continue to grow that in the next couple of years. So that, as I talked about in the beginning, do we change our structure or do we continue to grow our end strength? But very closely behind that, though, is our equipment readiness, which we saw a bit of a bathtub over the last year. And a couple of things that culminated. One was the cascading of some of our heavy formations from the active to the guard, which created some turbulence in the supply chain. And then the platforms that we gave to Ukraine and the resupply parts that we were pushing over there did dry up some of our supply chain and supply parts that were out there. Our Army Material Command and our sustainment enterprise has completely flipped that on its head. And I'd love to come and have them brief you on what we call Weapons 360. The complete automation using large language models and advanced artificial intelligence tools that's able to now look at the last 5 to 10 years worth of demand history across every one of those supply chains and much more precisely and accurately figure out what we need to sustain 2 Armor Brigade combat teams in Europe for the next 9 months, to be able to have that stuff pre-ordered ahead of time, to be able to anticipate and be ahead of the game in terms of what those are. So I guess that's the other piece. Even after we fix the problem, we're going to have to fix the supply chain side of things as well.
Thank you. Admiral Kilby?
Hey, a couple things, sir. One, maintenance completion on time. That's why we have an 80% combat surge ready goal. So if we can get our maintenance on time, we'll have more ships available. Manning's a piece of this too. So like everyone has testified, we're all working hard on recruiting. I'm going to exceed my goal this year, but I need to do that for a couple of years to buy down on the 23,000 gaps at sea. It takes 9 months to get a sailor from boot camp to the ship, so I've got to continue on that path to get my ships manned at where they need to be. Spare parts. I need to continue to buy OPN 8 and APN 6 parts for my aircraft and ships, so I don't cannibalize from other ships to get a ship underway, and that just creates a problem for me. So I need the right amount of spares so I can get that done. I need to continue to invest in things like additive manufacturing that make a part in 19 days instead of 40 weeks, so I can unleash the burden of our ships. And finally, one investment which is a little bit hidden is this thing called live virtual constructive training. So the ability to do training at sea at numbers that I think the adversary is going to throw at me is super important for tactics, techniques, and procedures, proficiency, and currency maintenance. So that's an investment I appreciate your continued support on.
General Mahoney.
Sir, thanks. And I think and this is not a cop-out answer, it would depend on the duration, the capabilities required to surge. If it is a system-heavy surge, we're going to run out of components for that system. The system itself and spare parts for the system. Let me give you an example. If we had to surge aviation right now, as you know, the F-35 is not where we need it to go. We would run out of machines before we ran out of ordnance and people to man those machines. Conversely, if it was a more manpower-intensive requirement, if it was an infantry unit, we are likely to run out of the people to surge over time than we do with the equipment that they require in all cases. I think if surge connotes expending ordnance, expending ordnance systems, we will run out of those in all cases. So if the bumper sticker is depth of magazine equals people, equals systems, equals ordnance and ordnance systems. You can't just take one or the other. Depth of magazine is defined by all of that.
Thank you. General Spain.
Sir, thanks. Nothing really new to add. The sustainment tail for us is critical. If you get into a protracted conflict, the ability to get parts, supplies, support equipment at the numbers required to sustain a fight over time, as at the scale that we've seen in Europe, we would be stressed to make that happen, no doubt. Eventually, people could be a problem, but that's not the critical problem from our warfighting units at this point. And then generically, procurement of critical munitions at the scale required is also a shortfall that we would continue to ask for help on from the Congress.
Okay. Thank you. General Guetlein.
Mr. Chairman, we have a completely different problem. We're your newest service, we are your leanest service, and we are in a build-up phase. So when you ask me, what do I need to surge? I need everything. I need people, I need equipment, I need it all. We are 9,500 strong. We've got to at least double that to meet the demand of our nation and our warfighters today. Going forward, we need more counter space kit, which is the ability to protect blue and deny red. How do I deny our adversaries' use of space and adversaries' ability to counter us? I need more space domain awareness, which means I need to understand what's going on in the space domain. I need to understand what our adversaries are up to and what their intent is. And finally, I need more C2 and more communications to round out and use the capabilities that we need. So we are building up from scratch, and we don't have a lot of surge capability. If we went to war today, we would do it on the backs of our people, and our Guardians are absolutely dedicated to doing the mission.
Thank you. And I want to just, again, because I asked you the question before about your interaction with those civilian companies that are in this new space. Is there, are we optimally engaging with them, or, and not, I don't want you to dime out any entities in the Pentagon, but are there any bureaucratic obstacles to you getting the access to the interaction with those companies? Are you being, do you have free access to go out and talk to people?
Chairman, we have had more dialogue and more access to commercial at any time in my 34 years in the United States Air Force and the United States Space Force. The dialogue we are having is more robust than ever. We are having reverse industry days, which means I have industry come hear what my problems are in a non-threatening environment where I protect their IP, and they pitch back to me what they think they can do to help me solve my problems in an open dialogue manner. We published our commercial space strategy last April that talks about how we're going to partner with industry going forward. And this year we started putting on our commercially augmented space reserve contracts to buy us capacity during times of crisis or conflict that we can't necessarily afford during times of peace. So it has been a very robust conversation. The challenges that you're talking about, there are some legal challenges they're working on. We're going against some policy challenges, and we're especially going against cultural challenges.
Let's have a future one thing is policy, because you got law and you got policy. Law, you either pass a law or, rescind it. Good policy gives you on-ramps and off-ramps. So let's talk more about the policies that will enable Space Force, but all of you, but especially Space Force, because you're still, if you will, you're writing your future here, having not had to necessarily deploy it yet and see how it works.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Davis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Let me be clear, bases like Seymour Johnson Air Force Base located in my district have been, in my opinion, neglected despite hosting 2 F-15E combat squadrons to deploy and do some really really important work to secure the Middle East as well as the American people. To ensure Strike Eagles, which provide the most avionics and payload capabilities of any fighter, remain ready, there are many opportunities to decouple flying hours from maintenance dollars. But what I would like to do is, if we could, General Spain, would like to understand the commitment of the Air Force. Is the plan still with the F-15Es and Lake and Heath? Where are those to go? My understanding was Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and I just want to reaffirm that that's the case.
Thanks, Representative Davis. Appreciate that question. The current plan has not changed for the Air Force. Certainly, we intend to continue to prioritize Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, and we intend to comply fully with the NDA language that keeps the older F-15E with 220 engines around based on that language. The discussion about where the Lake and Heath aircraft go, some of them certainly were intended to go to Seymour Johnson, and there's still discussions about the distribution, the full distribution, based on now retaining the 220 F-15Es that we already have at Seymour Johnson.
Are there or have there been any conversations, to your knowledge, not to send any of those aircraft to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base?
No, sir. The dialogues continued about the distribution based on retaining F-15Es at Seymour that originally we had discussed divesting. And so we're continuing to have that dialogue internally, and we'll certainly continue to have that with the Congress.
And General Spain, as we look at the reconciliation package that went through Armed Services, $127 million in particular allocated for maintenance and upgrade for F-15E retirements to prevent the retirements. Are you aware of those dollars going to any other locations or any other locations that would secure those dollars other than Seymour Johnson Air Force Base?
Not specifically, sir. I'll take that question for the record on the details of exactly where those dollars are going, but undoubtedly, if they're earmarked for F-15Es, then some portion of that will go to Seymour Johnson.
Thank you. General, you also mentioned the importance of remaining in compliance with the NDAA language. My understanding, the language that we approved basically solidified the strategic basing plan. What are your thoughts then of the recent decision to announce F-15EXs at Selfridge? Is that consistent with the strategic basing plan?
Well, sir, as you know, that's a presidential action and an order to move F-15EXs to Selfridge. So that's outside of the Department of the Air Force's strategic basing plan. We intend to continue to work the strategic basing plan for internal decisions, but we also fully intend to comply with the order that was given.
What is the impact then when such decisions are made outside of the strategic basing plan? How does it impact the work that you're doing in the Air Force?
It depends on the details of the actual order, which we're waiting on in this case. But for now, we don't really know the exact impacts while we're waiting on the specific language.
So we don't know the exact impact, but if I then reach out and I could, by way of this question right now, ask the President, the Commander-in-Chief, if you can make an announcement for Seymour Johnson. Then if other members begin to do the same thing, do you believe there would eventually be an impact?
Any decision made at that level can certainly have impacts, if not associated with the corresponding funds to execute the decision, and could potentially disrupt previous plans. In this case, we just simply don't know the details of that decision.
And my last question in the 7 seconds here, what's the implications of the cost to now retrofit Selfridge to accommodate this platform, the F-15EX?
We're still working through the cost. Certainly, there will be MILCON associated with the move from A-10s to F-15EXs as a very different platform going into that base. So there will be additional costs, and we'll certainly get the specific number back to you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Garamendi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you correctly instructed me that these gentlemen have been very generous with their time and their work, and therefore I will only ask them about an hour and a half of questions. No, I'll try to keep it much shorter than that. Mr. Chairman, you raised the issue of surge. There's a very, very real problem surging in the Pacific, and that's transport across the Pacific. It has not yet been dealt with. We've been wrestling with this on this committee and in the larger committee for a better part of at least 7 or 8 years. I want to bring to your attention a couple of opportunities that do exist. First of all, in the SHIPS Act, which was introduced last week, and it would create the opportunity to build transport vessels of many different kinds in the United States, as well as enhance and improve our non-government naval bases, non-Navy. So I draw that to your attention. I would appreciate your comments. I can somehow weave this into space, and I'm sure I can weave it into the Air Force, but the other three of you, it's most definitely your turf in addressing the issue of surge capacity. Essentially, the SHIPS Act is designed to rebuild our merchant marine, both in terms of personnel and capability of building ships. I will not go in great detail, although I've got about 20 specific questions for each of you on it, which I will ask later after you have a chance to review it. I think you'll find it to be solutions for some of the issues that you're facing. The second area, I'll make this also short, really has to do with the research agenda. The research agenda across the government is being significantly reduced by the administration. And there is reason to believe that it is being reduced in the Department of Defense also. And I suspect the research agenda is on virtually everything we've talked about here and some things we've not yet talked about. So as you go back, I would appreciate hearing from you about critical research that enables you to carry out your your plans for the future. And I would suggest that you will find support for those research programs here. And I can probably come up with a list of half a dozen without too much trouble, and you could probably expand on tripling that. So please take a look at those research dollars that you've been depending on. We want to make sure that they're still there, and I'm sure it goes everything from healthcare to PTSD and all the electrical systems that you deal with. I want to also put on the agenda, I've taken too many notes for a moment. Oh, no longer in my district, General Spain, is Beale Air Force Base. A decision was made that the CCA, Collaborative Combat Airframes, would be at least partially or perhaps even more so at Beale Air Force Base. It's a good choice. Having represented that for the previous 10 years, they continue to bang on my door. And not the Air Force, the support people, civilian support. And I would like to have some more detail about what and how much. Okay, you were talking about that a moment ago. Let's see here. Can I shuffle through the notes? Guam, dry docks on the West Coast. With regard to the Navy, using our allies' maritime facilities, dry docks, et cetera, is all good. But nonetheless, there's a balance here about bringing it home and doing some of the heavy work, the long-term work here. Otherwise, you're going to have your personnel sitting on some dock someplace, wondering what are they going to do there for the next year, whatever that availability is going to be. So a little thought about that and how you would use the West Coast facilities. Did I mention Mare Island? I think I did earlier. Space capabilities, we'll deal with that later. The training issues. I was talking to one of our colleagues offline here a moment ago. The training facilities that you have available, particularly the Army and the Air Force, and I think similarly the Marine Corps, perhaps a little less, is now, General, I want to get General Mingus the right word here, combined arms in which basically all of you are involved at those training facilities. I'm not sure how the Navy fits into this, but I suspect it does in some way. How we maintain and protect those training facilities becomes an important part of this committee's work. We've been dealing with this in great detail, basically in Nevada. But there's much more, and there are many other places also. We talked a little bit about Hawaii here a few moments ago. We will need more specificity on how your, General Mingus, specifically for you, and I guess this will go to Air Force and Space Force also, how the combined work that you will have to do to carry out your new ATI, how that fits, and the training facilities that you need and where you're going to use them. I'm thinking specifically about the Air Force and the Navy in Nevada. Will you be using those in some way, and if so, how? And similarly, insofar as this is applicable to the Marine Corps, I would like to see us get a pretty good fix on what is going to be needed, as really all of you are transitioning to a different modality of dealing with the issues that you have. What do you need for your training facilities? Where? What needs to be protected? What is at risk? So that we can go round and round on this as we did in the previous couple of years, specifically in Nevada. Let's see, I keep finding this Travis and Mare Island at the top of my list. I'll put it at the bottom. The issue of continuing resolutions. The appropriations for the current year are not over. We saw some of that in the reconciliation issue. I just know we're going to see more of it in the days and months ahead. We're going to need to understand how you are maneuvering. I would be shocked to find that you're not, so I assume that you are maneuvering to deal with the absolutely must do, cannot survive without. It would be helpful to us to have some specificity as we look at the remaining, what it would be Christmas before we actually finish the NDAA and maybe even the appropriations. So over the next 6 months or so, this issue is going to come back to us. And to the extent that we have some heads up, and it's really critical, can't survive without this or that, money for this or that, it would be helpful to know ahead of time. I think I'm going to go back to where I started. General Mingus, this is specifically for you. I asked this question, and it really applies across to all of you, and that is you are changing. And General Mingus, you have the biggest, at least currently known change. I suspect the others of you are similarly looking at significant change. I want to know a sustainment plan for each and every piece of that change. I don't want to sit here another 10 years, which I probably won't be able to do anyway, but I'm good for the next 6 years. You can count on that. And I want to know in your change, General Mingus, I'll just use you as an example. I know the others are doing some things similarly in big time changes. I want to know your sustainment plan. I don't want to ever get caught up as we did with the F-35, and it's 20 years later, and oh my, where's the depot? And I can go into the Navy and shipyards and so on and so forth. I won't. But the sustainment issue is incredibly important. And I want to finally compliment, I'm trying to figure out which one of you said resiliency 5 times over. I hope you don't get in trouble. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. And number one, thank you to all of you for your preparation for this hearing. Because it can be broad-ranging, I would suggest to you that the next time we get together it will be classified. Probably not too in the distant future, so we'll shape this up because we'll talk about the readiness in that classified setting, and it'll probably be sooner rather than later. There is no better deterrent than readiness, because if we're ready to fight, our adversaries will know that, and it will deter them. But we have to be prepared to fight, and fight in depth. And I guess as Congressman Garamendi said, and I would echo this, as you're changing, whatever it is you're changing, that sustainment plan for that change as you implement. It's almost the difference between transition between legacy and next gen of whatever it is you're doing, and stopping where you need to stop and sustaining the future. And I think might help. Well, we're not going to, this is not going to be a mission that's assigned today, but we as the United States government, especially the Department of Defense, and this is not service specific, we need to be able to pass an audit, okay? It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but we do have to pass it because that drives, in the end, the readiness in so many ways that we're still doing things that we need to stop doing, but we have not figured out how to stop doing them and account for that and then redirect those resources elsewhere. That's change management. So, you guys got a lot on your plate, and you got partners over here. So with that, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your patience and all your preparation, and this hearing is adjourned.